I'm not doing it. The words fell into the crystal-adorned dining room like stones thrown into still water, creating ripples of shock that reached every corner. Mom's carefully applied lipstick seemed to drain of color. Dad's wine glass froze halfway to his mouth. Catherine and my perfect, dying sister made us sound like air being let out of a balloon. I won't be your donor, I continued, my voice steady as granite. Not now. Not ever. The silence stretched between us like a chasm 35 years in the making. 35 years of being called a liar, a drama queen, an attention seeker. 35 years of watching them shower Catherine with love while treating me like a broken appliance they couldn't quite bring themselves to throw away. Mom's face crumpled. Maggie, this isn't funny. No, I agreed, setting down my untouched wine glass with deliberate care. It's not funny at all. Kind of like how it wasn't funny when you told Aunt Ruth I was faking seizures for attention at Christmas dinner 15 years ago. How did I get here? How did Margaret Maggie Thompson, who spent 25 years teaching third graders to be kind to one another, end up being the villain at her own family's dinner table? The answer lies buried in decades of dismissal, denial, and a rare genetic condition that took 35 years to diagnose. Flashback, the beginning of everything, 1987. I was 17. The pain started on a Tuesday morning in October, sharp and burning like someone had poured acid into my joints. I remember the exact moment I was reaching for my algebra textbook on the top shelf of my locker when fire shot through my shoulder and down my arm. The book fell, pages scattering across the hallway floor like fallen leaves. Mom, I whispered into the bathroom mirror that night, watching my reflection blur through tears of agony. Something's really wrong. Linda Thompson stood in the doorway behind me, her nurse's uniform still crisp despite a 12-hour shift at Hartford General. Even then, even as a teenager, I could see the skepticism written across her face like a prescription she'd already filled. You look fine to me, she said, that heavy sigh already perfected. Catherine never complains about aches and pains. Catherine. Always Catherine. My older sister, 3 years my senior and light years ahead of me in parental approval. Catherine, who was already planning her valedictorian speech while I was vomiting from pain in the school bathroom. Catherine, who would graduate summa cum laude from UConn's business program while I struggled to make it through my teaching degree at the local state school. This is different, Mom. I can barely move my. We'll see Dr. Peterson tomorrow if you're still being dramatic. She cut me off, already turning away. Catherine needs help with her college applications. Real problems. I spent that night curled on my bedroom floor, pressing my face against the cool hardwood and listening to Catherine's muffled laughter drifting from the living room where she and our parents planned her brilliant future. The pain pulsed through my body like a second heartbeat. But what hurt more was the sound of my family's happiness that seemed to exist only when I wasn't part of it. That was the night I learned that some kinds of pain go deeper than physical agony. Some kinds of pain live in the space between what you know is true and what everyone tells you isn't. The pattern emerges. Dr. Peterson was the first of many. Over the next 5 years, I would see 11 different doctors, 3 specialists, and 2 psychiatrists. Each appointment followed the same script. The tests are normal. Have you considered stress management? Young women your age often experience psychosomatic symptoms. Perhaps you should speak to someone about your anxiety. Meanwhile, Catherine flourished. She landed a prestigious internship at a Hartford bank during college, graduated with honors, and secured a management position before her 23rd birthday. Photos of her achievements lined our parents' mantelpiece like shrines to success. My college graduation photo taken from a distance because I was too sick to stand close to the camera was relegated to a corner of Dad's desk, half hidden behind Catherine's Employee of the Month awards. The marriage that was supposed to save me instead became another casualty of my mysterious illness. David was a good man. A history teacher at the high school where I'd started working, patient and kind, with gentle hands and a laugh that could fill a room. He proposed on a day when the pain was manageable, when I could almost pretend to be the normal woman he deserved. You make me want to be better, I told him through happy tears, and I meant it. I thought love might cure what doctors couldn't diagnose. For a while, it almost worked. The early months of marriage were sweet, filled with Sunday morning pancakes and evening walks around our neighborhood in West Hartford. David would rub my shoulders when the pain flared, bring me tea. Never questioned the heating pad that became my constant companion. But chronic illness is a slow poison that seeps into everything. The missed dinners when I couldn't get out of bed. The canceled plans. The way I'd grip the shopping cart in the grocery store, knuckles white, fighting waves of agony while trying to maintain normal conversation. Maybe you should try yoga, he suggested one evening, watching me struggle to open a jar of pasta sauce. Or meditation. Susan's sister swears by meditation for her stress headaches. Stress headaches. As if 20 years of teaching kindergartners wasn't stressful enough to explain the burning that consumed my joints, the fatigue that felt like drowning in thick honey, the mysterious episodes where my organs seemed to revolt against my body. I'll look into it, I promised, because I loved him, because I wanted to be the wife he'd signed up for. But deep down, I knew yoga wouldn't fix whatever was slowly destroying me from the inside out. The end came during my 31st year. I'd been teaching for 8 years, pouring myself into my students because children, unlike adults, didn't question my occasional absences or the careful way I moved on bad days. They just accepted Miss Thompson as she was, their teacher who sometimes needed to sit while reading stories, who kept a special cushion on her chair, who understood when they didn't feel well because she didn't feel well either. It was a particularly bad flare, the kind that left me vomiting from pain, shaking uncontrollably, unable to form coherent thoughts through the haze of agony. David found me on the bathroom floor at 3 in the morning, delirious and burning with fever. "We're going to the emergency room," he said, scooping me into his arms like a broken bird. "No," I whispered against his shoulder. "They'll just say it's anxiety again. Please, just let me ride it out." But this time was different. This time, something in my abdomen had ruptured a cyst. They later determined twisted and infected. Emergency surgery. 3 days in the hospital. David calling my parents, begging them to visit. "Maggie's in surgery," I heard him say through my post-anesthetic haze. "She could have died. Can you please just come see her?" Dad's voice on the speakerphone was tired, dismissive. "David, you know how she gets. Catherine's engagement party is tonight, and Linda's been planning it for months. We can't miss it for another one of Maggie's episodes." Another one of Maggie's episodes. I watched my husband's face change in that moment. Watched him realize that the woman he married came from people who would choose a party over their daughter's life. Watched him understand, perhaps for the first time, the depth of abandonment I'd been living with my entire adult life. He stayed 2 more years. Tried to love me enough to make up for their absence. But chronic illness is a thief that steals more than health. It steals hope, joy, and eventually, the people who can't carry the weight of watching someone they love suffer without cure or explanation. "I can't do this anymore," he said on a rainy Thursday in March, his suitcases already packed by the door. "I love you, Maggie, but I can't watch you disappear a little more every day. I can't be the only one fighting for you." I didn't argue. How could I? He was right. I was disappearing, had been for years, eaten alive by pain no one could name and exhaustion no one believed. The divorce was quick, quiet, merciful. David kept the house. I kept my secrets. At 33, I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment and learned to live with the crushing solitude of being chronically ill and completely alone. The teaching years, my students became my salvation and my torment. 5-year-olds with their sticky fingers and gap-toothed grins, their unquestioning acceptance of their teacher's limitations. When I had to sit during story time, they gathered around my chair like goslings around their mother. When I moved slowly on painful days, they moved slowly too, unconsciously matching my pace. "Mrs. Thompson, why do you look sad sometimes?" Little Emma Martinez asked one afternoon, her dark eyes serious beyond her years. "Sometimes grown-ups have invisible hurts," I told her, smoothing her hair. "Just like when you have a tummy ache that no one can see. Does it make you feel better when we hug you?" "It makes me feel better than anything in the world." And it did. For 8 hours a day, I had purpose beyond my pain. I was needed, valued, loved unconditionally by 22 small humans who didn't care if their teacher was broken. But even that sanctuary couldn't last forever. The episodes began increasing in my late 40s. Days when I couldn't get out of bed, when the room spun like a carnival ride, when my heart raced and my hands shook so badly I couldn't hold a pencil. I used up all my sick days by October. Started coming to work pale and trembling, holding onto desks for support. Maggie, Principal Morrison said gently after finding me collapsed in the supply closet during lunch. Maybe it's time to consider medical leave. I'm fine, I lied. The same lie I'd been telling for 30 years. Just a bug. But I wasn't fine. I was dying by degrees, my body staging a slow motion rebellion against whatever was consuming it from within. The children deserved better than a teacher who might collapse during circle time, better than someone who had to cancel field trips because she couldn't trust her own body to function. I retired at 51, 25 years of service condensed into a small ceremony in the school cafeteria. My students made me cards with crayon drawings of stick figures holding hands under rainbow skies. We love you, Mrs. Thompson, in kindergarten spelling filled page after page. Catherine sent a gift card to Barnes and Noble and a note. Enjoy your retirement. Maybe now you'll have time for hobbies instead of always being sick. Instead of always being sick. As if illness was a choice I was making, a hobby I'd cultivated for decades out of sheer perversity. Grace, Grace Williams entered my life like an answered prayer I hadn't known I was saying. We taught together for 15 years, she in fourth grade, me in kindergarten, but it wasn't until my retirement party that we really talked. You know, I always wondered, she said, helping me carry flowers to my car while the celebration continued without us. About your health struggles. I have fibromyalgia, diagnosed 3 years ago. Took me forever to find a doctor who listened. A doctor who listened. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. Most doctors don't listen to women, especially about pain, Grace continued, her voice matter of fact. We're taught to minimize, to push through, to not make a fuss. Meanwhile, we're dying inside. I started crying right there in the school parking lot, 34 years of suppressed anguish pouring out of me like water from a broken dam. Grace held me while I sobbed, this near stranger who had just spoken the truth I'd been carrying alone for so long. There's a doctor, she said when my tears finally stopped. Dar Harrison. He's different. He actually believes women. That night, I called the number she'd given me and made an appointment for the following week. Then I sat in my empty apartment and allowed myself to feel something I hadn't experienced in decades, hope. Dr. Harrison didn't look up from my file when I entered his office. He was actually reading my stack of medical records. Tell me about the pain, he said, still focused on the papers in front of him. Shouldn't you tell me it's all in my head first? I tried to make it sound like a joke, but my voice cracked on the words. That's usually how these appointments start. He finally met my eyes, and I saw something there I'd never seen in a doctor's face before. Genuine interest. I prefer to listen before I make assumptions. Tell me everything. Everything. When was the last time someone had asked for everything? So I did. I told him about the burning that started in my joints at 17. The way it spread through my body like wildfire over the years. Some days consuming everything, other days retreating to a manageable smolder. The fatigue that felt like drowning. The episodes that sent me to emergency rooms where young residents looked at my medical history and prescribed antidepressants. Your sister, he said, scanning a particular page. Has she shown any symptoms? Catherine? I almost laughed. No, she's perfect. Always has been. Bank vice president, 2 kids. Beautiful house in Farmington. She doesn't have time for mysterious illnesses. Dr. Harrison nodded slowly, making notes. Then he ordered tests. Lots of tests. Blood work, genetic panels, specialized scans, tests no other doctor had bothered with because they were too busy suggesting therapy. 3 weeks later, I sat in his office again, clutching the results with trembling hands. It's a rare genetic condition, he explained, pointing to highlighted sections of the report. Hereditary periodic fever syndrome with systemic manifestations. The symptoms match perfectly the joint pain, organ inflammation, neurological episodes. We can start treatment now that we know what we're dealing with. I stared at the papers, at the long medical term that finally gave a name to my personal hell. 35 years of being called a liar, and here was proof, scientific validation, medical justification for every moment of agony I'd endured. Can I have copies? My voice sounded strange, distant. Of course. He paused, studying my face with kind eyes. Are you going to tell your family? I thought about Dad's cold dismissals over the years. Mom telling her bridge club I was having emotional problems when I missed family gatherings. Catherine rolling her eyes whenever my health was mentioned. That subtle suggestion that I was somehow choosing to be sick for attention. No, I said carefully, folding the papers and sliding them into my purse. Not yet. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by the validation I'd spent 3.5 decades searching for. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Catherine just made senior vice president. When are you going to get your life together? When was I going to get my life together? I held the diagnosis papers up to the light, reading the medical terminology that finally explained why getting my life together had been impossible. These weren't tears of sadness or relief rolling down my cheeks. They were tears of something else entirely. Something that tasted like justice delayed but not denied. Now, I whispered to the empty room. They'll never get to say they were right again. I didn't know then how prophetic those words would become. The call, 6 months later, I was making coffee when Grace called, her voice tight with an emotion I couldn't place. Maggie, have you checked the news? I paused, coffee grounds scattered across my counter. I try not to. It's bad for my mental health. Check your email. I just sent you a link. I pulled up my laptop with shaking hands. The new medication was helping, but mornings were still difficult. I clicked the link and felt my coffee mug slip from my fingers. It shattered on the kitchen floor, but I barely noticed. The headline read, Local Banking Executive Collapses During Board Meeting. Below it was a photo of Catherine being loaded into an ambulance, her usually perfect hair splayed across the stretcher like spilled silk. My sister, who'd never had a sick day in her life, who'd spent 40 years mocking my mysterious illnesses, was being rushed to Hartford General, the same hospital where doctors had dismissed my symptoms for decades. She was presenting quarterly reports to the board of directors, Grace explained. Witnesses say she just collapsed mid-sentence. They're saying it might be stress-related. Stress-related. The same phrase they'd used to explain away my symptoms for 35 years. My phone stayed silent. No calls from Mom. No texts from Dad. Even as their golden child was rushed to the hospital, they couldn't bring themselves to reach out to their other daughter. Which hospital? I asked, though I already knew. Hartford General. The same one where they told me I was making it all up, I finished. Ironic, I didn't go right away. Instead, I spent 3 days watching the local news coverage grow, reading articles about Catherine's stellar career and the mysterious collapse that had left Hartford's banking community in shock. Her husband Michael gave carefully worded interviews, looking appropriately concerned in his expensive suits. Her teenage children released a statement through their private school. The governor's office sent flowers. Still no word from my parents. When I finally walked into Hartford General's waiting room, I found them huddled together like refugees from their own denial. Mom was pacing, her heels clicking against the linoleum with military precision. Dad sat perfectly still, staring at nothing, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. Maggie, Mom stopped mid-stride, surprise and something that might have been guilt flickering across her face. What are you doing here? I saw the news, I said, settling into a chair across from them. Thought I should check if my sister was dead. Dad's head snapped up. Don't be dramatic. Dramatic? I smiled, the same practice smile I'd perfected during 35 years of medical appointments. Like collapsing in front of a board of directors? Before either could respond, a familiar figure emerged from the double doors. Dr. Harrison, my doctor, the one who had finally believed me, approached with careful steps. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, he said, his voice professionally neutral. We have the test results. Mom grabbed his arm with desperate fingers. Is she going to be okay? What's wrong with her? Dr. Harrison's eyes found mine across the waiting room, and I saw recognition there, a flash of understanding that made my stomach clench. Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere private. The consultation room. They led us to a small consultation room where Catherine lay propped up in a hospital bed, looking small and fragile in a way I'd never seen before. Gone was the confident executive, the perfect daughter who'd never met a challenge she couldn't overcome. In her place was a woman who looked frighteningly like me, pale, exhausted, eyes filled with the particular fear that comes from having your body betray you without explanation. Michael hovered beside her bed, his perfect hair slightly mussed, his usual composed expression replaced by barely controlled panic. "It's a rare genetic condition," Dr. Harrison began, and my heart stopped. "Hereditary periodic fever syndrome with systemic manifestations. The same condition, the exact same condition I'd been living with for 35 years. The symptoms can be severe," he continued, consulting his clipboard. "Chronic pain, fatigue, organ dysfunction, neurological episodes." "No," Mom interrupted, her voice shrill with denial. "That's impossible. Catherine has always been healthy. Always been healthy. Unlike her other daughter, the broken one, the attention seeker, the liar." "Actually," Dr. Harrison said gently, "this variant appears to be more aggressive than typical cases. Without immediate intervention, the prognosis is—" He paused, glancing at his papers with the careful neutrality of someone delivering devastating news. "Weeks, perhaps months." Catherine made a sound like a wounded animal. Michael grabbed her hand so tightly his knuckles went white. "But there must be treatment," Dad said, his voice cracking for the first time in my memory. "A cure, medication, something. There's a procedure," Dr. Harrison explained, "but it requires a very specific genetic match. We've checked the National Donor Registry, and unfortunately—" I knew what he was going to say before he said it. Of course I did. The universe has a sixth sense of humor that way. "There's only one viable match," he finished, looking directly at me. The room went silent. 5 pairs of eyes turned to me, filled with different flavors of desperation. After 35 years of being invisible, I was suddenly the most important person in the room. "Maggie," Mom whispered, reaching for my hand with trembling fingers. "Please." I stepped back, away from her touch, away from the desperate hope suddenly radiating from my family like heat from a furnace. "Please?" Catherine spoke for the first time, her voice thin and reedy. "I'm scared." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment, I saw myself at 17, standing in the bathroom doorway, begging Mom to believe that something was really wrong. I saw myself at 25, calling from the emergency room while they chose Catherine's engagement party over my crisis. I saw myself at 33, sitting alone in divorce court because chronic illness had cost me my marriage while they celebrated Catherine's promotion. For the first time in our lives, my sister looked breakable. "Dr. Harrison," I said, keeping my voice steady through sheer force of will, "could I have a moment alone with my family?" He nodded and left, closing the door behind him with a soft click. Michael started to follow, but Catherine waved him away with a weak gesture. When we were alone, truly alone for perhaps the first time in decades, I walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot where I'd once sat in my car crying after another doctor told me nothing was wrong. "You know what's funny?" I said, not turning around. "I've been sick with this exact condition for 35 years. 35 years of begging you to believe me, to help me, to just see me." "Maggie, we didn't know," Dad started. "No," I cut him off, turning to face them. "You didn't want to know. There's a difference." Mom was crying now, mascara streaming down her cheeks like black rivers. Dad looked lost, smaller somehow, as if the truth was physically shrinking him. Catherine stared at her hands, unable to meet my eyes. "Now you need something from me," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "Now I'm suddenly valuable. Now you believe in genetic conditions and chronic pain and all the things that made me a liar for 35 years. Please," Catherine whispered again. "I don't want to die." I walked to the door, pausing with my hand on the handle. "I'll think about it." As I left, I heard Mom collapse into sobs, but it was Catherine's silence that followed me down the hallway, the same silence that had greeted my own cries for help all those years ago. The campaign. They gave me exactly 6 hours before the campaign of desperation began. First came the text messages. Mom, then Dad, then Michael, who'd somehow gotten my number. Promises, apologies, bribes, all the things that had been conspicuously absent during my decades of suffering. I ignored them all and went about my day, letting the familiar rhythm of my new life, gentle yoga, careful meal preparation, medication schedules that finally worked, drown out their digital pleas. The knock on my apartment door came at sunset. I knew it was Michael before I opened it. He had the kind of cologne that announced itself 3 hallways away, expensive, aggressive, designed to command attention. Maggie, he flashed his perfect teeth, the smile that had charmed bank boards and country club committees. Can we talk? I leaned against the doorframe, studying this man who'd been my brother-in-law for 15 years but had never once asked how I was feeling. About what? Look, I know things haven't been perfect between you and your family, he said, running a manicured hand through his professionally styled hair. But Catherine needs you, and I'm prepared to make it worth your while. Worth my while. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, and showed me a banking app displaying more zeros than I'd ever seen in one place. Name your price. 7 figures if necessary. Think about what you could do with that kind of money: the best doctors, private care, a house in whatever neighborhood you want. I laughed, and the sound seemed to startle him. You think this is about money? Everything's about money, he said, as if explaining basic arithmetic to a child. Just tell me what you want. What I wanted. I wanted someone to believe me when I was throwing up blood in the teacher's lounge, I said, stepping closer to him. I wanted my father to visit me when I had surgery and no one knew if I'd wake up. I wanted my mother to ask how I was doing instead of immediately comparing me to Catherine. I wanted my sister to acknowledge that I wasn't faking it when I missed her wedding because I was in the ICU. His practiced smile began to falter around the edges. That was then. This is now. You're right. This is now. And now I'm asking you, what changed? When did you all start believing in this condition? When Catherine, exactly, I cut him off. When Catherine got it, because she matters. She's always mattered more. He shifted uncomfortably, his expensive shoes squeaking against my doormat. That's not fair. No, it's not. None of this is fair. I started closing the door. Goodbye, Michael. Wait. He stuck his Italian leather shoe in the doorway. What do I tell her? Tell her I'm thinking about it. I slammed the door hard enough to make him yelp and pull his foot back. The coffee offering. The next morning, my parents were waiting outside my building like elderly sentinels of desperation. Mom held 2 coffee cups from the boutique cafe downtown, the expensive kind she'd never bothered to buy for me before, in flavors she must have researched because she'd never cared enough to learn my preferences. Maggie, please. She held out a cup like a peace offering, her usually perfect appearance showing cracks. Just talk to us. Now you want to talk? I took the coffee but didn't drink it. 35 years of silence. And now you want to talk? Dad stepped forward, looking older than his 75 years. We made mistakes. We know that now. Do you? I turned to face him fully. Do you remember what you said when I called you from the emergency room 4 years ago? When I thought I was having a heart attack. His face went blank, the same expression he'd worn whenever I tried to explain my symptoms. You said, "Stop being dramatic, Maggie. Catherine's getting the Community Service Award tonight, and your mother needs to be there for the photos." Then you hung up. I took a sip of the coffee. It was perfect, exactly how I liked it, which somehow made everything worse. I had acute pericarditis. Inflammation around my heart. I could have died, but you chose a photo opportunity over your daughter's life. We didn't know, Mom whispered, her voice barely audible. You didn't want to know. The words exploded out of me with 35 years of suppressed fury. Every time I tried to tell you something was wrong, you compared me to Catherine. Every time I needed help, you told me to be more like Catherine. Well, guess what? Now Catherine is exactly like me, and suddenly this condition is real. She's dying, Dad said quietly. I was dying too, for decades. But that didn't matter because it was just me, right? Just the broken daughter, the disappointment, the one who couldn't get her life together. Mom reached for my hand with desperate fingers. This time I let her take it. Let her feel how my joints were already swelling despite the early morning hour. How my skin burned with the low-grade fever that had been my constant companion for 35 years. Please, Maggie, we're begging you. Help your sister. I looked at their faces, really looked at them. Mom's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the exhaustion etched around her eyes. Dad's usual stoic expression had cracked, revealing something that might have been regret. Remember my college graduation? I asked suddenly. They exchanged confused glances. I couldn't walk across the stage because I was in too much pain to stand for the ceremony. Catherine gave the valedictorian speech at her graduation the same weekend, and you told everyone I was just jealous of her success, that I was having emotional problems. I pulled my hand away from Mom's desperate grip. That was the day I stopped expecting anything from either of you. Maggie, I'll think about it, I said, cutting off whatever excuse was forming. But not for you, and not because you're finally acting like parents. I'll think about it because despite everything you've done to me, Catherine is still my sister. I turned to go back inside, then stopped. Oh, and Mom? Next time you try to bribe me with coffee, remember that I'm lactose intolerant. Another medical fact you chose to ignore for 35 years. I left them standing there, the untouched coffee growing cold between them as I rode the elevator up to my apartment. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. I'm sorry. I should have believed you. I stared at those words until they blurred. 35 years too late, but at least she was the first one to say it. I typed back a single word. Why? Her response came quickly. Because now I know what it feels like to scream and have no one hear you. I turned off my phone without replying. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way. The negotiation. You know they're manipulating you, right? Grace said, watching me pack my overnight bag. This sudden kindness, the apologies, the daily gift deliveries. It's all because they need something from you. I folded another sweater, my movements careful and deliberate. The medication was helping, but I still had to be mindful of my joints, especially when I was stressed. I know. Then why are you going to this family meeting? Because I want them to remember this moment. I zipped up the bag, meeting her concerned gaze. When they finally treated me like a human being, but only because they needed parts of my body. The family meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock. I arrived at 7:15, just late enough to make a point. They'd gathered in Catherine's private hospital room like conspirators planning a heist. Mom, Dad, Michael, and Catherine herself, propped up in bed wearing designer pajamas that probably cost more than my monthly medication budget. Maggie? Mom jumped up, relief flooding her features. We were worried you wouldn't come. That's new, I said, setting down my bag with deliberate care. Usually you worry that I will come. Catherine winced, and I noticed she looked worse than before. Her skin had taken on a yellowish tinge I recognized too well from my own mirror during the worst flares. We've been talking, Dad said, his voice unusually gentle, about how to make this right. I sat in the visitor's chair, crossing my legs with the careful precision of someone who's learned to manage chronic pain. Have you? The offers came in a flood. The best medical care money could buy, private nurses, a new apartment closer to them, unlimited access to specialists, experimental treatments, anything I wanted. And what about therapy? I asked when they finally paused for breath. Of course, Mom nodded eagerly. Whatever kind you need. No, I leaned forward, pinning each of them with my gaze. Therapy for you. All of you. To understand why you spent 35 years watching your daughter suffer and decided she was lying. The room went quiet except for the steady beep of Catherine's monitors. That's reasonable, Catherine said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. We should do that. And public acknowledgement, I continued, pulling out my phone. Social media posts, letters to family friends, whatever it takes to correct every time you told people I was crazy or attention-seeking or just looking for drama. Mom's face tightened, but Dad nodded slowly. Done. And one more thing. I opened my notes app, scrolling to a document I'd been working on for weeks. I want you to listen to something I wrote. Really listen. I started reading. Age 17, first symptoms. Mom says I'm being dramatic. Age 18. Collapsed in the school parking lot. Dad says I'm probably hungover. Age 19. Hospitalized for 3 days with organ inflammation. No visitors because Catherine has a big presentation at work. I read for 10 minutes, chronicling every dismissal, every cruel comparison, every missed cry for help. The room grew quieter with each entry, the weight of decades settling over us like dust. Age 25, emergency surgery for ruptured ovarian cyst. Parents choose Catherine's engagement party over hospital visit. Age 31, another hospitalization. Dad tells my husband I'm probably making it up for attention. Age 33, divorce finalized. Ex-husband cites family's lack of support as contributing factor. By the time I finished, Mom was crying silently. Dad stared at the floor as if it might open up and swallow him. Catherine had turned away, but I could see her shoulders shaking. That's not even half of it, I said, putting my phone away. But it's enough to make my point. We'll do everything you ask, Dad said, his voice hollow. Just please help your sister. I stood up, smoothing my skirt with hands that were steadier than they'd been in years. I'll think about it. Think about it? Michael burst out, his composure finally cracking. She's dying. I was dying too, I said calmly, for decades. Funny how that only matters when it's Catherine. I left them there, but instead of going home, I went to the hospital library. I spent hours researching what would happen if I refused survival rates, alternative treatments, legal implications. The results were clear. Without my donation, Catherine had weeks, maybe a month. There were no other matches in the National Registry, no experimental treatments available in time. My phone buzzed with a text from Grace. How did it go? I wrote back. Did you know they can't legally force me to donate? They can't even take my organs if I die unless I've agreed to it beforehand. Her response came quickly. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about power, I replied, and how they finally see me now that I have it. The dinner, the next morning, Mom cornered me in the hospital cafeteria. We're planning a family dinner, she said, trying to sound casual while her hands shook around her coffee cup. To celebrate once you and Catherine are both recovered from the procedure. I stirred my tea slowly, watching the steam rise like incense. Am I invited this time? Unlike Catherine's promotion dinner last year, she flinched as if I'd slapped her. Maggie, please, we're trying. No, you're desperate. There's a difference. She's your sister. Was I her sister when she told her book club I was faking seizures for attention? I looked up from my tea, meeting her desperate gaze. When she laughed about my mysterious illness at family gatherings, Mom gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. People change. She's changed. No. I stood up, gathering my purse with deliberate calm. She's just scared, like I was for 35 years. Except when I was scared, no one came running to save me. What are you saying? I'm saying I'll be at your dinner. I slung my purse over my shoulder, smiling the same enigmatic smile Catherine used to give me when she knew something I didn't. And I'll have an announcement to make about the donation. As I walked away, I heard Mom call after me. We're having it tomorrow night. Don't be late. I didn't turn around. Let them plan their celebration. Let them think they'd won. Tomorrow night, they'd learn what it really means when karma comes full circle. The Last Supper. Mom outdid herself for the dinner. Crystal glasses that hadn't seen daylight since Catherine's wedding. The good china with the gold rim that was usually reserved for Christmas and other celebrations of Catherine's achievements. Fresh flowers, expensive roses from the florist downtown, not the grocery store bouquets she used to buy for my birthday when she remembered. Catherine herself sat at the head of the table in a wheelchair, wrapped in a cashmere blanket that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was trying to look stronger than she was, but I could see the effort it took her to hold her head upright. A toast? Dad stood, raising his glass with trembling hands. To family, to healing, and to new beginnings. Everyone lifted their glasses. I took a small sip of wine, letting it linger on my tongue like communion wine, sacred and bitter. Maggie, Mom smiled that bright, hopeful smile she'd been practicing all week. We have something for you. She pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table with ceremony. Inside was a check with more zeros than I'd seen outside of a bank statement, and keys to what she explained was a luxury apartment in West Hartford's most exclusive neighborhood. For after the surgery, she said, her eyes bright with tears of anticipated joy. So we can take care of both our girls properly. Michael cleared his throat, straightening his tie. And I've arranged for the best post-operative care money can buy. Private nurses, physical therapists, whatever you need. We want to make things right, Dad said, his voice thick with emotion. A fresh start for all of us. Catherine reached across the table with a hand that shook from more than weakness. I know it doesn't make up for everything, but we're trying. I'm really trying. I looked at their expectant faces, all glowing with relief and premature victory. They thought they'd won. They thought money and promises could erase 35 years of cruelty and neglect. They thought love could be purchased at the last minute like flowers from a gas station. I have an announcement too, I said, setting down my wine glass with careful precision. Mom beamed, practically vibrating with joy. Of course, sweetheart. Tell us. I took another sip of wine, savoring the moment, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. I'm not doing it. The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop in that dining room, if pins made sounds when they hit crystal and china and the shattered expectations of people who'd spent decades taking love for granted. What? Catherine whispered, the word barely audible. I'm not doing the donation. I set down my glass, the soft clink echoing like a gunshot. I won't be your donor. Mom's face went white, then gray, the color draining out of her like someone had pulled a plug. This isn't funny, Maggie. No, I agreed. It's not funny at all. Kind of like how it wasn't funny when you told Aunt Martha I was faking seizures for attention at her funeral. But we agreed, Dad stammered, gesturing helplessly at the check, the keys, the promise of a future built on my sacrifice. The apartment, the care, everything you asked for. You can't buy redemption, I said, my voice steady as bedrock. And you certainly can't buy my body parts. Michael stood up so fast his chair toppled backward, crashing to the floor like a gavel. You can't do this. She'll die. Like I almost died, I kept my voice calm, reasonable, the tone I'd used with difficult parents during 25 years of teaching. 3 years ago when I had kidney failure and none of you answered your phones because Catherine was getting that community service award. That was different, Mom pleaded, reaching for me across the table like a drowning woman reaching for a life preserver. We didn't know then. No, you didn't want to know. I reached into my purse and pulled out a legal document, unfolding it with the solemnity of someone reading a will. What is that? Catherine whispered, her voice hoarse with fear. Legal documentation showing I removed myself from the organ donor registry 18 months ago. I smoothed the papers on the table like I was setting up for a lesson plan. I also filed paperwork specifically prohibiting donation of any organs or tissue to family members. I smiled, the same teacher's smile I'd used when explaining difficult concepts to slow learners. It's ironclad. My lawyer made sure of it. The room erupted. Mom screamed an inhuman sound of anguish that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her lungs. Dad knocked over his wine glass, the red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. Michael started yelling about lawyers and lawsuits and legal challenges, his perfect composure completely shattered. But Catherine just stared at me, tears rolling down her face in silent rivers. Why? She asked, the single word carrying the weight of a lifetime of sibling rivalry and misunderstanding. Because 35 years ago, I needed my big sister, I said, standing slowly, my joints protesting but my resolve unwavering. I needed my family, and you all decided I wasn't worth believing. I picked up my purse, slinging it over my shoulder like armor. Actions have consequences. Sometimes they take decades to arrive, but they always come. You're killing her. Mom sobbed, mascara streaming down her cheeks. Your own sister. No. I paused at the dining room entrance, looking back at the wreckage of their perfect dinner, their perfect family, their perfect denial. Your disbelief killed her. Your cruelty, your years of dismissal, your choice to love conditionally, that's what's killing her. I'm just not offering a last-minute salvation you never offered me. Please, Catherine whispered, the same word she'd used in the hospital, but softer now, broken. I'm scared. The same words from the hospital, but this time they didn't touch me. I was scared too, I said, for 35 years. Funny how no one cared then. Dad grabbed my arm as I turned to leave, his grip desperate and surprisingly strong for a 75-year-old man. You can't do this. We're your family. I pulled away with more force than necessary, years of suppressed anger lending strength to my movements. Family believes each other. Family shows up. Family doesn't gaslight and abuse and then expect forgiveness when they suddenly need something. You're a monster, Michael spat, his handsome face twisted with rage and helplessness. I paused at the door, considering his words. No, I'm just the first person in this family to say no to Catherine. Maybe if someone had done that sooner, she wouldn't have grown up thinking she could treat people like garbage without consequences. As I walked out, I heard Mom's wails, Dad's angry shouts, and Catherine's quiet sobs. But over all of that, I heard something else. The sound of karma finally catching up. In my car, I took a deep breath and texted Grace. It's done. Her reply came instantly. Are you okay? I looked back at the house, at the warm light spilling from the dining room windows, at the family that only valued me when they needed parts of my body. No, I typed back, but for the first time in 35 years, I'm free. I drove away from their perfect house, their perfect dinner, their imperfect daughter who finally learned what it meant to be powerless. Sometimes the best revenge isn't what you do to others. Sometimes it's what you refuse to do for them. The media storm. The story broke on a Tuesday. Banking executive denied life-saving donation by sister, screamed the headlines across local news websites and social media feeds. My phone exploded with notifications, calls from reporters, messages from strangers, death threats from people who thought they knew the whole story. Turn off your social media, Grace advised, closing my laptop with gentle firmness. They're crucifying you out there. I'd been reading comments calling me a murderer, a monster, a heartless bitch who deserved to die in my sister's place. The mob mentality was swift and merciless, fed by carefully crafted interviews and strategic media manipulation. Michael had wasted no time going on television. I watched his performance from my living room, marveling at his ability to summon tears on command while maintaining his perfectly styled appearance. She's always been jealous of Catherine, he told the sympathetic news anchor, dabbing at his eyes with a silk handkerchief. This is her revenge for a lifetime of perceived slights. Perceived slights. As if 35 years of medical gaslighting and family abandonment were just figments of my imagination. The next day, Mom's tearful interview appeared on the morning show. She dressed carefully for maximum sympathy, a simple black dress, minimal makeup to show her natural grief, Dad's supportive hand on her shoulder. We're just trying to understand why she wants to punish us like this, she said, her voice breaking in all the right places. We love both our daughters equally. We always have. Always loved us equally. I turned off the television and sat in the silence of my apartment, listening to the protesters gathering outside my building. Someone had leaked my address, and now I was essentially under siege by strangers who'd appointed themselves judges of my character based on carefully edited news segments. Grace brought groceries and checked my mail, which now included handwritten hate letters mixed in with the usual bills and advertisements. You should tell your side, she said, sorting through the latest batch of threats. Fight back. I shook my head, but then my phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. They're making you into a monster. Let me fix it. That was the final straw. I opened my laptop and started typing. The blog post began simply. My name is Margaret Thompson. I am 52 years old, and I have been living with a rare genetic condition for 35 years. I was 17 when I first realized something was wrong with my body. I was 51 when my family finally believed me, but only because my sister got sick too. I wrote everything. Every dismissal, every cruel comparison, every missed family event because I was too sick to attend. I wrote about the years of teaching through chronic pain, about the divorce that stemmed partly from my family's refusal to support me, about the decades of being called a liar and attention seeker while begging for help. My sister is dying, I wrote near the end, and I'm supposed to save her because now, suddenly, This condition is real. Now, suddenly, chronic pain matters. Now, suddenly, my body has value, but only the parts they can cut out and give to her. I hit publish at 3 in the morning, then turned off my phone. By dawn, the post had been shared thousands of times. Other chronically ill people started sharing their own stories in the comments. Women wrote about medical gaslighting, about families who didn't believe them, about the particular pain of being dismissed by those who should protect you. I believe Margaret started trending on social media. Medical experts began discussing the history of women being disbelieved by doctors. Chronic illness advocates shared the post across support groups and forums. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It had become a catalyst. Then Catherine posted her response on her company's website. My sister told the truth. I was cruel. We all were. We watched her suffer for years and chose not to believe her. I'm dying now, and I understand her pain in a way I never did before. But it's too late for understanding. Some debts can't be paid with apologies. I don't blame her for refusing to save me. I blame us for never trying to save her. The comments exploded. The media narrative began to shift. Support groups rallied around my story. Medical professionals discussed the systematic dismissal of women's pain. The conversation expanded beyond my family's dysfunction to address broader issues of medical bias and family abuse. But it was too late for Catherine. The confrontation. Michael showed up at my door that evening. No cameras this time. Take it down, he demanded, his usual polish replaced by desperate fury. Your blog post. Take it down, or I'll sue you for defamation. I leaned against the doorframe, studying this man who'd been part of my family for 15 years without ever acknowledging my existence. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation, I said calmly. Everything I wrote is documented. Want to see my medical records? The hospital bills I paid alone? The text messages where you all dismissed my emergencies? You're killing her. No, I said quietly. I'm just not saving her. There's a difference. He raised his hand as if he might strike me, then thought better of it, probably remembering the security cameras in the hallway. This isn't over. Actually, it is. I started closing the door. And Michael? The security cameras in this building work great. Maybe think about that before you come threatening me again. After he left, I got another text from Catherine. I meant what I wrote. I'm sorry. Not because I'm dying, but because I finally understand what living has been like for you. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Understanding only matters when it changes how you treat people. You had 35 years to understand. You chose not to. She wrote back immediately. I know. And now I have to die with that choice. The vigil that night, I sat with Grace on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker like stars. The protesters had finally dispersed, leaving behind only scattered signs and the lingering scent of their righteous anger. What happens now? Grace asked, sipping the chamomile tea I'd made for both of us. Now, I said, tasting the bitter herbs on my tongue. They learn what it feels like to be powerless. To know something's wrong and not be able to fix it. To scream for help and have nobody listen. Somewhere across town, Catherine was lying in her hospital bed, finally understanding what it meant to be the one nobody could save. Catherine gets what she always wanted, I said softly. To be just like me. The city hummed below us, indifferent to our small drama of life and death. In Hartford General, my sister was learning the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes the consequences of our actions take decades to arrive, but when they do, they come with interest. The end. Catherine died on a Thursday morning in November. I found out from a news alert on my phone while waiting for coffee at my usual cafe downtown. The barista, a sweet girl named Emma, who reminded me of my former students, saw my hands shaking and asked if I was okay. My sister just died, I said, surprised by how normal my voice sounded. She gave me my coffee for free and a gentle squeeze on the shoulder. It was the kindest gesture anyone had offered me in weeks. The media circus started immediately. Reporters camped outside my apartment again, shouting the same questions. How do you feel about your sister's death? Do you regret your decision? What do you say to people calling you a murderer? Grace helped me pack a bag that night. Iceland, she said, holding up my passport like a prayer. You need to get away from all this. 24 hours later, I stood on a black sand beach outside Reykjavik, watching waves crash against volcanic rock. The wind whipped my hair, and for the first time in months, I could breathe without feeling the weight of public judgment pressing down on my chest. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. We're having a private funeral. Please don't come. I typed back. Wasn't planning to. 3 days into my trip, while hiking a remote trail, my phone rang with an unknown number. Is this Margaret Thompson? This is Margaret Wells, Catherine's attorney. She left something for you, a letter and other items. She was quite insistent about you receiving them after her passing. I don't want anything from her, I said, sitting down on a boulder warmed by the pale Arctic sun. She said you'd say that. She also said to tell you it's not what you think. It's not an apology or a guilt trip. It's the truth you deserve. I gave her my email address. Catherine's letter. The scanned letter arrived an hour later. Dear Maggie, it began. If you're reading this, I'm dead. Good. That means I can finally tell you everything without fear of consequences or family pressure to maintain our perfect image. The truth is, I knew I was sick months before I collapsed in that boardroom. I had the same symptoms you described for years, the joint pain, the fatigue, the episodes that left me doubled over in agony. But I watched how they treated you, and I was terrified. Terrified of becoming the other daughter, the broken one, the one they didn't believe. So I hid it. I took painkillers in secret. I scheduled doctor appointments under false names and paid cash, so there would be no insurance trail. I pushed through presentations while my organs were shutting down, smiled through charity galas while my body screamed for help. I kept working and achieving and being perfect until my body literally gave out in front of 200 people. I couldn't hide anymore after that, but by then it was too late. The doctors told me something I never shared with our parents. Even if you had agreed to donate, my chances were slim. The disease had progressed too far. I was dying regardless, but I let them blame you anyway because it was easier than admitting I'd killed myself through denial and perfectionism. You were right about everything about them, about me, about how we treated you. I was their perfect daughter because I learned early to hide anything that might make me less than perfect. You were braver than me. You asked for help. You told the truth, and we punished you for it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know that your strength, the strength we mocked, was something I envied but never had. You survived 35 years of what killed me in months. There's more in my private safe. Medical records showing early symptoms I hid. Diary entries detailing how I watched them destroy you while I stayed silent. Financial records of the secret treatments I sought while they called you a liar. Everything you need to prove that their perfect daughter was just better at lying than you ever were. Do what you want with it. Burn it. Publish it. Use it to finally make them understand what they did to you. Or don't. Your choice. For once in our lives, I'm giving you the power to decide what truth they get to know. You didn't kill me, Maggie. Our family's culture of perfection and denial did. And maybe, in the end, I killed myself by choosing their approval over my own survival. Be free, sister. You've earned it. Catherine, I sat on that boulder until the sun set, reading the letter over and over. Grace called twice, but I let it go to voicemail. Finally, as darkness fell over the Icelandic landscape, I typed out an email to Catherine's attorney. Send me everything. Then I turned off my phone and started walking. The northern lights were beginning to dance across the sky, green and purple ribbons of light that made me feel small and significant at the same time. I thought about Catherine hiding her pain behind perfect smiles, about Mom and Dad creating a world where their daughters had to choose between honesty and love, about the weight of secrets and the price of truth. Some debts are paid in silence, I whispered to the Arctic wind, others in blood. Yours was paid in both. The lights continued their celestial dance, indifferent to my family's tragedy. The document, the package from Catherine's attorney arrived while I was still in Iceland. Grace forwarded me a photo of the sealed envelope, but I asked her to wait until I returned to open it. Are you sure you want to see what's inside? She asked when I finally sat at my kitchen table, staring at the thick manila envelope. No, I said, breaking the seal with hands that no longer trembled. But Catherine made her choice. Now I need to make mine. The contents spilled across my table like evidence from a crime scene. Medical records dating back 5 years. Diary entries in Catherine's precise handwriting, describing symptoms that mirrored my own. Hospital receipts paid in cash. Prescription bottles filled under assumed names. Years of hidden suffering, carefully documented by my perfect sister who'd chosen silence over truth. She really was sick, Grace whispered, reading over my shoulder. All that time, watching them destroy you for having the same condition. I gathered the papers into neat piles, organizing them by date and type with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent 25 years grading student papers. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Please come home. We need to talk. I looked at Catherine's secret documentation, then at Grace. Want to take a drive? The final confrontation. They were waiting in their perfect living room when I arrived. Mom had lost weight, her clothes hanging loose like she was shrinking from the inside out. Dad looked older, more fragile, as if the truth had aged him years in a matter of weeks. Neither spoke as I sat down and placed Catherine's records on the coffee table between us like playing cards in a high-stakes game. What's that? Mom asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The truth, I said, opening the first file. Catherine's truth. I read them entries from her diary, descriptions of pain that could have been written by me. Secret doctor visits dating back years. Prescriptions filled under false names. A detailed account of watching our parents dismiss my symptoms while she suffered the same fate in silence. She was sick, I continued, watching their faces crumble like ancient paper. Long before her collapse. She just knew better than to tell you. Dad's voice cracked when he finally spoke. Why wouldn't she tell us? Because she saw what you did to me. I pulled out more papers, medical bills, specialist reports, evidence of a parallel life lived in secret. She wrote about it. How watching you dismiss my pain taught her to hide her own. How being the perfect daughter meant never showing weakness. Mom started crying, not the theatrical sobs she performed for the cameras, but the quiet weeping of someone confronting an unbearable truth. You didn't just fail me, I said quietly. You failed both your daughters. The only difference is I survived it. What do you want from us? Mom whispered through her tears. Want. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I don't want anything from you. Catherine left me these papers to use however I chose. I could publish them, expose your perfect family for what it really was. I could destroy what's left of your reputation. They both flinched, and I saw fear flicker in their eyes, not fear for my well-being, but fear of public embarrassment. But I'm not going to do that. I stood up, leaving Catherine's secrets scattered across their coffee table like autumn leaves. Because Catherine made her choice, and she died with it. That's punishment enough. Then why show us? Dad asked. Because you need to live with the knowledge that you didn't just torture one daughter, you terrified the other into silence, into choosing death over disappointing you. I walked to the door, pausing with my hand on the handle. That's your karma to carry. Margaret, wait, Mom called out, using my full name for perhaps the first time in years. Please, can we try to fix this? I turned back one last time. Some things can't be fixed. Some debts can't be paid. Live with that. I met each of their eyes in turn. I have to. Epilogue of the documentary. The next morning, Dr. Harrison called. I heard you're back in town. There's something I'd like to discuss with you. We met in his office, where a camera crew was setting up equipment and adjusting lights. We're making a documentary, he explained, about chronic illness, medical gaslighting, and family trauma. Would you be interested in telling your story? I thought about Catherine's hidden papers, about all the other people suffering in silence, about the movement my blog post had inadvertently started. Yes, I said, but not just my story. Catherine's too. The whole truth. He nodded, understanding immediately. That's exactly what we need. That evening, I sat in my new apartment, and not the one they'd tried to bribe me with, but one I'd chosen for myself, and started painting. It was something I'd always wanted to try, but never had the energy for during my sickest years. The sunrise I was creating on canvas wasn't perfect. The colors bled into each other in unexpected ways. The lines weren't straight, the proportions slightly off. But it was honest. Real. Like the pain that still lived in my body, manageable now, but never fully gone. Like the truth that finally lived in my words. Grace brought dinner and watched me paint, her presence a comfortable anchor in my new life. How does it feel? She asked, settling into the chair beside my easel. Being the last one standing, I dipped my brush in yellow paint, adding another streak to my imperfect sunrise. It feels like freedom, I said. Not the happy kind, but the heavy kind. The kind that comes with knowing you survived something that killed someone else. And your parents? They'll live with their choices, just like Catherine died with hers, just like I'm living with mine. I added another streak of yellow to my canvas. It wasn't quite right, might never be quite right, but it was mine. My truth, my pain, my healing. My choice to create something beautiful from something broken. Sometimes that's all we get. Not perfect justice or complete closure, just the quiet victory of surviving and the courage to paint our own tomorrow. Some stories don't end with forgiveness, I said, stepping back from my canvas to survey my work. Some end with truth, and sometimes that's enough. Outside my window, the city continued its eternal rhythm, indifferent to individual tragedies and triumphs. But inside my small apartment, surrounded by the tools of my new artistic pursuit and the friendship of someone who'd always believed me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 35 years. Peace. Not the absence of pain that would never fully leave me, but the presence of something stronger. The knowledge that I had finally, after all these years, chosen myself. The documentary would air in 6 months. The Chronic Illness Advocacy Group had asked me to speak at their national conference. Support groups across the country were sharing my story, using it to help others find their voices. But tonight, it was just me and my imperfect painting and the hard-won understanding that sometimes the best revenge isn't what you do to others, it's what you do for yourself. Some stories end with revenge. Others end with justice. Mine ended with the rarest thing of all, the freedom to stop seeking either and simply exist, authentically and unapologetically, in the truth of who I had always been.